Hey there, greetings everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, and welcome here to the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this channel. So we're here tonight for the mini-series we've been running. We're running this now for 4 episodes. This will be number 4. This is the Monsters of the 70s, and we're going to be talking about this band. Sorry to get it. Pink Floyd. So Pink Floyd was one of those huge bands from the 1970s, but they started in the 1960s, actually quite a bit further back than you would think, back to 65. But this album is kind of the zenith, the end of the era for them, really, I think. But it's the top of the shelf because it was at the pinnacle of their popularity when this album came out, and it was a monster hit for them as well. So anyways, we're going to be talking a little bit about Pink Floyd. They definitely deserve to be one of the bands picked for this set of episodes. There are 10 in all. They are the 4th one. So Pink Floyd started in 1965, and before they released their first album in 67. And they disbanded or were put to rest in 2022, according to David Gilmour. Now, of course, all these bands are much more than capable of coming back, but I don't think Pink Floyd will. There's just too much animosity there. They had a number of albums, 15 in total. Their career spanned it from, like I said, from 67 when their first album came out, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, all the way up to their final album, which I think was called Endless River. It's the only one I do not own. Kind of leftovers, a little bit on the leftover side from Division Bell. But some great albums here, just some fantastic music overall. The band basically started out with Syd Barrett, Roger Waters, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright. After the first album, Syd Barrett had taken mentally ill. He actually performed somewhat on the second album as well. But they brought in David Gilmour, who had actually been around since the beginning, but wasn't really listed as a member. Anyways, he came in and kind of became, over time, I think he's now the owner, the de facto leader of the band. But those are the 5 members of the band. Really the original and I guess you would call classic members of the band. Roger Waters, Syd Barrett, Nick Mason, Richard Wright, and David Gilmour. Probably their biggest album in their history is, in my belief, is probably this album here, Dark Side of the Moon. Over 50 million copies sold. I think it was on the Billboard Top 200, the longest of any album. Over 740 weeks on the charts. That started in 73 and went right through to 88. I think there was a break somewhere in there where they missed a few weeks before they came back in. Anyways, fantastic album. It's their 8th studio album, of course. My favorite, though. My favorite is this one, Animals. Kind of a concept album. Very much animal. I think they kind of patterned it along Animal Farm. Great album, sold over 12.5 million copies worldwide. Has been my favorite album now for the past couple decades. Probably the album that, if you were going to go into my history, probably the album that kind of solidified them as a band I like. Up until then, I was kind of, at best, unconcerned or uninterested. At worst, I didn't like them. So The Wall kind of drove me to the don't like them category. And it wasn't so much that The Wall was a bad album, because it certainly isn't, but I think it just got way too much play, and it has a kind of a droning sound to it. That's just my opinion. It just seems to drone on. There's not much difference between most of the tracks. There are some outstanding tracks on the album, Run Like Hell, Mother, Comfortably Numb. These are all fantastic tracks, but a lot of the other ones are just kind of could do without, right? It could have been a single album. I would have been fine with it. However, that single attitude that I developed in high school when I was only 13 or 14 proceeded to dominate my view of Pink Floyd right up into the late part of the century when I discovered Dark Side of the Moon at a yard sale for $1. And that began to change. At first I said, well, it's only $1. I'll take it home. I've heard this album is really good. I listened to it, and it took a bit, but after a while I started to like it. And then when Animals came along, I bought that in the store, which came in about 2006. That's when my Pink Floyd history began to really excel, and now they've become one of my favorite bands. But it took a long time for them to get there, over 20 years to get up to where they are. So they came kind of late to the game, as did some other bands, but they definitely came a little bit late to the game. But they deserve the attention they're getting now. I think most people like Pink Floyd. There doesn't seem to be as much of a hatred for them. So some bands are really well loved, but also really well hated. And there's a lot of bands like that, actually. But Pink Floyd seems to have circumnavigated that particular problem. So for me, that's my history, and that is, I believe, their history in some ways as well. Their own history, that is. Their notable things that happened to them, well, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 96, the UK Music Hall of Fame, I believe, in 2006, and then the Hit Parade Hall of Fame in 2010. They also had their own postage stamp released in England, the second band to have that done behind the Beatles, of course. And notoriety, they've had over 250 million albums sold worldwide, so considered one of the great, big, large, dominant bands of all time. Much of the neo-prog scene that came in the 80s attribute the mixture of Genesis and Pink Floyd as their kind of sounds. And so Pink Floyd had a huge influence on that. I think they're a very unique band in a lot of ways, having multiple different eras of sound on their music. And for me, that's what's important about this band, that they contributed a lot of sound, and a lot of bands have been influenced by them and taken on bits and pieces of their sound over the years. To try and drive that neo-progressive or that progressive rock sound. To me, I always thought of Pink Floyd as being a band of noises. They always had a lot of different noises on their albums, and some of their albums I didn't even actually consider music early on. I thought they were just noise. But yeah, I've grown to like them quite a bit. They're a top part of my group, elite group now, which is now 11 bands. So it went from Elite 7 since I started the channel, and added 4 new bands, including Pink Floyd as one of them. So that's my take on my Monsters of the 70s featuring, sorry, I couldn't remember the word there for a second, featuring Pink Floyd. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We will be doing another episode of this nature next week, another Monsters of the 70s. This one will feature Kiss, and this is a band very different from Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd generally loved but not really hated. Kiss, on the other hand, magnificently loved and just as magnificently hated. So it'll be an interesting video, to say the least. Anyways, we will see you all next week, and have yourself a good evening, and goodbye here from the Prog Monster.